countdown to terror. It was New Year's Eve, and a group of friends, Emma, Chris, Mia, and Alex, decided to celebrate in a secluded cabin deep in the woods. The cabin belonged to Alex's late uncle, a man known for his eccentric behavior and obsession with the occult. Despite its eerie reputation, the friends thought it would be the perfect place to party away from the crowds. As the sun set, the group set up the cabin for the celebration. They decorated the space with fairy lights and prepared snacks, while a vintage clock on the wall ticked loudly, its hands moving ever closer to midnight. While exploring the cabin, Mia found a dusty box filled with strange items, candles, symbols etched on wooden tablets, and a journal. Curiosity got the better of her, and she brought the box to the living room. "Let's add some mystery to the night," Mia said, flipping through the journal. It contained bizarre rituals and ominous warnings, one of which read, "Do not speak the words after the clock strikes 12. Chris laughed. "It's just some old nonsense. Let's try it." They agreed to perform a ritual from the journal as a joke. The instructions were simple. Light 3 candles, chant a phrase, and make a wish. The group gathered around the table, lit the candles, and recited the chant. "O spirits of the passing year, hear our call. Grant us one wish before the midnight fall." They laughed it off, making ridiculous wishes. Chris wanted to win the lottery, Emma wished for eternal youth, and Alex wished for a better job. But Mia, in a quieter voice, wished for something else. "Show us the truth of the unknown." As soon as the chant ended, the room went cold. The candles flickered violently before extinguishing themselves. Outside, the wind howled, and the sound of footsteps echoed around the cabin. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Chris tried to brush it off. "It's probably just the wind." But the footsteps grew louder, circling the cabin. Then a knock came at the door, slow, deliberate, and unnerving. Who could that be? "We're in the middle of nowhere," Alex said, his voice shaking. Chris approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. No one was there. He opened the door slightly, but the porch was empty. Yet fresh footprints led from the forest to the door and back. When Chris closed the door, the vintage clock struck midnight. Instead of the usual chime, it let out a deep, resonating gong. The sound reverberated through the cabin, making the walls tremble. Suddenly the lights flickered, and a shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the room. It was tall, with glowing red eyes and elongated limbs. The friends froze in terror as the figure pointed at Mia. "You called us," it hissed in a guttural voice. Mia stammered, "It was just a joke." The figure's laugh was bone-chilling. The truth of the unknown comes with a price. One by one, the friends experienced horrifying visions. Chris saw himself trapped in an endless maze. Emma watched her reflection age rapidly. Alex found himself buried alive, and Mia saw the cabin engulfed in flames with her friends screaming for help. When the visions ended, the group realized they were no longer alone. The room was filled with shadowy figures, all staring at them with unblinking eyes. The friends huddled together, their fear palpable. The shadowy figure spoke again. "Leave this place before the first light of the new year, or you will join us forever." Panic-stricken, the group grabbed their belongings and fled the cabin. As they drove away, they looked back to see the cabin's windows glowing with an eerie red light. The vintage clock's chime echoed in the distance, growing fainter as they sped away. The friends never spoke of that night again, but they all knew they had narrowly escaped something far beyond their understanding. And every New Year's Eve, they couldn't help but hear the faint sound of a clock ticking, reminding them of the terror they faced on that fateful night. Story 2. The haunting countdown continues. The group didn't talk about the incident for months. Each of them tried to bury the memory, but it lingered like a shadow, creeping into their dreams and everyday lives. They had left the cabin far behind, but the terror had followed them home. Chris was the first to notice something was wrong. It began with the clock in his apartment. No matter how many times he adjusted it, it always struck midnight with the same ominous gong they had heard at the cabin. Worse, every time it did, he saw fleeting shadows moving in the corners of his room. Emma's reflection became her tormentor. At first it was subtle. Her reflection would hold a smile a moment too long, or blink when she hadn't. Then it escalated. One night, her reflection pressed its hands against the glass, as if trying to break through. She covered all the mirrors in her house, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Alex began waking up to the sensation of suffocation, as though he was being buried alive. His sheets felt heavy, like layers of soil, and his bedroom walls seemed to close in on him. The worst part was the whispers, muffled voices that seemed to come from under his bed, begging him to join them. Mia, the one who had uttered the fateful wish, suffered the most. Her dreams were vivid and unrelenting, filled with images of the cabin burning, her friends screaming for help, and the shadowy figure standing in the flames, watching her. But it didn't stop at dreams. She started finding ashes on her pillow and the smell of smoke lingering in her room, even though there was no fire. Desperate for answers, Mia called the others. "We can't keep ignoring this," she said. "Whatever we brought back from that cabin isn't going away." Reluctantly, they agreed to meet. They gathered at a local diner, their faces pale and eyes hollow from lack of sleep. "We need to figure out how to stop this," Alex said, his voice trembling. "I can't keep living like this." Mia placed the journal on the table, the same one they had found in the cabin. "I took it with me that night," she confessed. "I thought it might help us understand what we unleashed." Flipping through the pages, they found a section that hadn't been there before. The ink was fresh, the words seeming to shift on the page. "The curse will follow until the debt is paid. Return to where it began. Face the truth, or be consumed by it." "We have to go back," Mia said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "Are you insane?" Chris snapped. "We barely made it out alive." Emma nodded. "There has to be another way." But Alex, who had been silent, spoke up. "What choice do we have? It's either this or we let it destroy us." Reluctantly, they agreed. That night they packed supplies and drove back to the cabin. The journey was tense, the road shrouded in mist. When they arrived, the cabin looked unchanged, as though it had been waiting for them. The air was heavy, and the vintage clock was still ticking, its hands frozen at 1 minute to midnight. The group hesitated at the door, but Mia pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was exactly as they had left it, except for one difference. The shadowy figure stood in the center of the room, waiting. "You've returned," it said, its voice a chilling echo. "What do you want from us?" Mia demanded, clutching the journal. The figure gestured to the clock. "Time is the price. One of you must stay, to take the place of those who came before." Panic erupted among the group. "We're not doing that," Chris shouted. But the figure raised a hand, and the room filled with visions of their worst fears. Chris trapped in the endless maze, Emma's reflection shattering and pulling her into the mirror, Alex buried alive, and Mia engulfed in flames. The figure spoke again. "Choose, or all of you will remain here forever." Mia stepped forward, her hands trembling. "It's my fault. I made the wish. I'll stay." "No." Alex grabbed her arm. "We'll find another way." But the figure shook its head. "The choice has been made." Before anyone could stop her, Mia placed the journal on the table and turned to her friends. "Go, don't look back." As the clock struck midnight, the cabin shook violently. The friends ran outside, their hearts breaking as the door slammed shut behind them. From the windows, they saw Mia standing with the shadowy figure, her expression calm as the flames consumed the cabin. The friends drove away in silence, the weight of their loss heavy in the air. Back home, the hauntings stopped. The clocks returned to normal, the whispers ceased, and the shadows vanished. But every New Year's Eve, they gathered together, lighting a candle for Mia, knowing she had sacrificed herself to save them. And somewhere, deep in the woods, the cabin still stands, waiting for the next group to stumble upon it. Story 3. The Echoes of Sacrifice. For Emma, Chris, and Alex, life after Mia's sacrifice was never the same. Each year on New Year's Eve, they lit a candle in her memory. But the sense of closure they sought always eluded them. They avoided talking about that night, but the scars it left ran deep. Months turned into years, and the cabin became a whispered legend among locals. Stories of strange lights, shadowy figures, and ghostly screams kept adventurers away. Yet the three friends couldn't shake the feeling that Mia's story wasn't over. One particularly cold December, Alex received a letter in the mail. The envelope was old, the paper brittle, and the handwriting eerily familiar. It simply read, "Come back. She's waiting." Shaken, Alex called Emma and Chris, sharing the letter. At first, they dismissed it as a cruel prank, but as New Year's Eve approached, they all began experiencing unsettling signs. Emma's mirrors started fogging over with the words, "Help her," written in reverse. Chris's clock, which he had thrown away years ago, reappeared on his wall, ticking loudly, and Alex woke up every night at exactly 11:59, hearing Mia's voice whispering his name. "This isn't over," Alex said during a hastily arranged meeting. "She's reaching out to us." Chris was reluctant. "We barely made it out alive last time. Going back could be suicide." Emma, however, couldn't ignore the signs. "If there's even a chance we can help Mia, we owe it to her to try." After a tense discussion, they agreed to return to the cabin one final time. They packed carefully, bringing tools, flashlights, and anything they thought might protect them. As they approached the cabin, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence enveloped the woods. The cabin stood as they remembered it, though its walls seemed darker, more decayed, as if the very structure had absorbed years of despair. Inside, the vintage clock was still there, its hands frozen at 1 minute to midnight. The journal lay on the table, untouched, but open to a new page. The words written in fresh ink chilled them to their core. "She is trapped in the in-between. To free her, you must face your own truths." The shadowy figure appeared once more, its red eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You have returned," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "We want to free her," Alex said, stepping forward. The figure tilted its head. "To free her, you must confront the darkness within yourselves. Only then will the path be revealed." Before they could respond, the room spun, and each of them was plunged into their worst fears. Chris's trial. Chris found himself back in the endless maze, its walls towering above him. The sound of footsteps echoed, growing louder and faster. As panic set in, he realized the maze wasn't just physical. It represented his inability to take responsibility for his actions. The shadowy figure whispered, "Face your guilt. Admit your role in her fate." Through tears, Chris shouted, "I'm sorry. I didn't take it seriously. I thought it was all a joke. The walls began to crumble, and Chris found himself back in the cabin. Emma's trial. Emma was trapped in a hall of mirrors, each reflection distorting her image. Some showed her aging rapidly, while others revealed her deepest insecurities. The reflections spoke in unison. You hide behind appearances. Admit your fear of being truly seen. Emma fell to her knees, crying, "I'm terrified of being alone. I thought if I looked perfect, people would stay, but I pushed everyone away, even Mia." The mirrors shattered, and Emma was back in the cabin. Alex's trial. Alex woke up, buried alive, dirt pressing down on him. He screamed and clawed at the soil, but it seemed endless. The figure's voice surrounded him. "You fear failure, yet you bury your potential. Accept that mistakes are part of growth." Through sobs, Alex whispered, "I was too scared to lead. I let her make the decisions because I was afraid of being wrong." The soil gave way, and Alex found himself back in the cabin. The final trial. Reunited, the three faced the shadowy figure once more. It gestured to the clock, which began ticking. "You have faced your truths, but one final task remains. The journal holds the key. Read it aloud, together." Hesitantly, they opened the journal and read, "Through pain and truth, we break the chains. By love and sacrifice, we reclaim the lost. Spirits of the in-between, release her soul." The clock struck midnight, and the room filled with blinding light. The shadowy figure let out a deafening scream as it dissolved into nothingness. In the center of the room, Mia appeared, her form shimmering like a ghostly apparition. "You came back for me," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Tears streamed down their faces as they reached out to her, but their hands passed through her. "I can't stay," Mia said, "but I'm free now, thanks to you." With a soft smile, she began to fade. "Live your lives fully. Don't let fear hold you back." As she disappeared, the cabin began to collapse. The friends ran outside, just as the structure crumbled into ash. The woods were silent once more, but the weight on their hearts was lifted. They knew Mia was at peace, and for the first time in years, they felt hope. Story 4. The Lingering Shadow. In the months that followed, life seemed to return to normal for Emma, Chris, and Alex. The haunting visions and nightmares ceased, and the guilt that had weighed on them for years began to lift. They took Mia's final words to heart, trying to live without fear or regret. However, as New Year's Eve approached again, subtle signs began to appear. Nothing as overt as before, but enough to unsettle them. Chris's new clock occasionally skipped to midnight without warning. Emma's mirrors showed fleeting glimpses of shadows, and Alex often felt a chill in the air, even in the warmest rooms. They brushed it off as lingering trauma, remnants of their ordeal, but deep down, they knew something was still wrong. On New Year's Eve, they gathered once more, lighting a candle for Mia and reminiscing about her bravery. It was meant to be a peaceful night, but as the clock struck 11:59, a familiar sensation gripped them. The air grew heavy, and an unnatural silence fell over the room. The candle flickered violently before extinguishing itself. The clock's hands froze, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Emma clutched Alex's arm. "This can't be happening again," she whispered. A deep, resonant voice echoed around them, one they hadn't heard before. "You broke the chains, but the debt remains." The shadows coalesced into a figure, not the one they had faced before, but something far more sinister. Its form was fragmented, shifting between shapes, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Its eyes burned with an intense, otherworldly light. "What do you want from us?" Alex demanded, stepping forward despite the terror coursing through him. The figure tilted its head. She was freed, but the balance was disturbed. Another must take her place. Chris shook his head, backing away. "Number, we ended this. We faced our fears, freed Mia. This isn't fair." The figure's laughter was cold and hollow. "Fair. The rules were never yours to decide." The room began to warp, the walls twisting as though the house itself was alive. The trio found themselves pulled into another realm, one that resembled the cabin but was darker, more twisted. The air was thick with despair, and faint whispers surrounded them, growing louder with each passing second. Suddenly a voice broke through the chaos. "Run!" It was Mia. She appeared before them, her form more solid than the last time they had seen her. Her face was filled with urgency. "You have to leave now. This isn't your fight anymore." "We're not leaving you again," Emma shouted. Mia shook her head. "It's not me they want. The balance has shifted, and it's coming for all of us. You have to find the origin, where this all began. Only then can it end for good." Before they could respond, the figure lunged at them, and the world dissolved into chaos. The origin of the curse. When they awoke, they found themselves in an old, decrepit village, surrounded by dense forest. The air was eerily quiet, and the houses looked abandoned, their walls covered in strange symbols. "This must be where it started," Alex said, helping Emma to her feet. Chris pointed to a crumbling church at the edge of the village. "That looks like a good place to start." Inside the church, they discovered a hidden chamber beneath the altar. The walls were lined with faded murals depicting rituals and sacrifices. In the center of the room was a stone pedestal, holding an ancient tome. Emma carefully opened the book, its pages filled with cryptic writings and sketches of the shadowy figure they had encountered. One page stood out, detailing a ritual meant to bind a malevolent entity. The notes in the margins suggested the ritual had failed, dooming the village to eternal torment. "They tried to trap it," Emma murmured, "but they only made it stronger." The final page of the book outlined a counter-ritual, one that required confronting the entity at its source and using an artifact from the original ritual to destroy it. "That must be the clock," Alex said. "It was always the key." They returned to the cabin's remains, now a smoldering pit in the ground. Among the ashes, they found the vintage clock, untouched by the flames. As they retrieved it, the figure reappeared, more furious and chaotic than ever. "You cannot undo what has been done," it roared, its voice shaking the ground. With the clock in hand, they began the counter-ritual, chanting the incantation from the book. The figure fought back, its shadowy tendrils lashing out at them, but they held their ground. As the final words of the incantation were spoken, the clock shattered, releasing a blinding light. The figure let out a deafening scream as it was pulled into the void, its form disintegrating. The light faded, and the trio found themselves back in the real world. The cabin's ruins were gone, replaced by an empty clearing. The oppressive weight in the air was lifted, and for the first time in years, they felt truly free. Emma, Chris, and Alex never spoke of the events again, but they each carried a piece of the experience with them. They lived their lives fully, as Mia had urged them to, and every New Year's Eve, they lit a candle not out of guilt, but in remembrance of their friend who had sacrificed so much. The cabin and the curse were gone, but the memory of their ordeal served as a reminder. Some doors should never be opened, and some wishes come at too high a price.